Since she was 14, she dreamed of becoming a great singer, but few people believed that dream was possible. They said it was just a phase, that she didn't have what it took to captivate the world. Yet, even without the support she had hoped for, she never gave up. And now, here she was in the grand finale, standing before a crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart beat steadily. She knew this song had the power to move everyone, to tell the story she had always wanted to share. The stage was lit, and the audience sat in complete silence. With a shy smile and a confident gaze, she sang the first note. The soft melody filled the air, and the emotion she carried was about to sweep through every person in the audience. I've walked this road 1,000 miles, with weary eyes and quiet smiles. The world had told me to let go, but deep inside, the fire still glows. At 68, Martha Fitzgerald had lived a life filled with challenges. A widow for nearly a decade, she resided alone in a modest house on the outskirts of Chicago, where the quiet streets were often unsettling. Her husband's passing had left her with not only a deep loneliness, but also mounting bills that slowly drained the savings she had built through years of factory work. Now, with only a small pension barely covering her needs, her life felt like a long, weary journey with little left to hope for. Her children, now adults with families of their own, had drifted into their busy lives, leaving Martha behind in many ways. To them, she had fulfilled her role. She had raised them, supported them, and now she was simply a woman who should be content with what remained. What they didn't know was that beneath her gray hair and tired eyes, a long-held dream still flickered, the dream of becoming a singer. It was a desire that had followed her for as long as she could remember, but it had been buried beneath the responsibilities of life. As a child, Martha had found solace in music. Her voice had been her escape from the harsh realities of life, filling the small rooms of her childhood home with soft melodies. But as she grew older, marriage, children, and the struggle to survive pushed that dream aside. Yet whenever she was alone, she would hum to herself, imagining a life where her voice carried her far beyond the boundaries of her reality. Now at 68, Martha's dream felt like a distant echo, too faint to chase, but too precious to forget. The only person who still saw that spark in Martha was her 10-year-old granddaughter, Emma. Full of curiosity and warmth, Emma had always adored her grandmother, and the bond between them was undeniable. While others dismissed Martha's dreams as foolish or unrealistic, Emma saw something beautiful in them. She would sit at her grandmother's feet, eyes wide with admiration, as Martha softly sang old songs. To Emma, her grandmother was a star waiting to be discovered. When a citywide talent contest was announced, offering a grand prize of $10,000, Emma was the first to suggest that Martha enter. It wasn't just about the money, although it could certainly change Martha's life. It was the idea of finally pursuing the dream she had carried for so long. But the obstacles were numerous. For one, Martha had very little money to spare, and the thought of paying for travel into the city for auditions felt impossible. But as she sat in her dimly lit living room, staring at her old flickering television, Martha made a decision that would set her on a new path. "I'm selling the TV," she declared one evening, her voice steady but her heart uncertain. Emma's eyes widened in shock. "But Grandma, how will we watch movies together?" Martha smiled softly, placing a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "We'll make new memories, sweetheart. Besides, this is something I need to do." And so, with a heavy heart, Martha sold the television. It didn't bring in much, but it was enough to cover the cost of her first trip into the city for auditions. Packing up the TV for its new owner was bittersweet. It was a piece of comfort she had held on to for years, but now, in its place, was the possibility of something greater. A chance to follow a dream she had once thought lost. On the day of her first audition, Martha wore her best dress, a simple blue gown that had seen better days, and boarded the metro to the city. The ride was long and uncomfortable, her nerves building with each stop. She felt out of place among the other contestants, many of whom were young, polished, and full of confidence. But as she walked into the grand theater where the auditions were held, Martha reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't competing against these other singers. She was competing for herself, for the girl inside her who had once dreamed of a stage. and for the granddaughter who believed in her so fiercely. When her name was finally called, Martha stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the auditorium vast and imposing. For a brief moment, doubt threatened to swallow her. What was she doing here? Could she really still sing? But then she closed her eyes, picturing Emma's hopeful face, and took a deep breath. Her voice, though older and rougher than it had once been, carried a lifetime of emotion. She sang from her heart, her voice weaving through the years of joy, loss, and perseverance that had defined her life. The judges, who had barely glanced at her when she first walked in, now listened intently, their expressions softening as they realized they were witnessing something special. When the song ended, the silence in the room was palpable. Martha stood on the stage, her heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. But then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder. The judges exchanged glances, and Martha knew that, regardless of the outcome, she had done something brave. Back home, Emma was waiting for her, her eyes bright with excitement. "How did it go, Grandma?" Martha smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "It went just fine, sweetheart, just fine." After that first audition, something in Martha had shifted. For years, her life had been dominated by routine, cleaning, cooking, paying bills. But now, there was a new rhythm in her days. The memory of stepping onto that stage, the feeling of pouring her soul into the music, had rekindled a fire inside her that she had long forgotten. Every evening, after dinner was done and quiet settled in, Martha would rehearse in her small living room, humming softly so as not to disturb the neighbors. Emma, as always, was her biggest fan. She would sit cross-legged on the floor, her eyes shining with admiration as Martha sang. Sometimes, she would join in, their voices blending together in a sweet, imperfect harmony. These moments felt magical, as though they were transported to a place where dreams still mattered, and time wasn't something that could hold them back. But while Emma's support was unwavering, not everyone in Martha's life shared her enthusiasm. David, her eldest son, was particularly vocal in his disapproval. One evening, as Martha was getting ready to practice, David showed up unannounced, his expression serious. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, stepping into the small living room without waiting for an invitation. Martha could sense the tension in his voice, but tried to stay calm. "What's on your mind, David?" He looked around the room, his eyes landing on the stack of sheet music on the coffee table and the small notepad where Martha had been jotting down lyrics. "This singing contest. Is it really worth all this trouble? You're not young anymore. You should be not chasing after dreams that—" He paused, shaking his head. "That aren't realistic." Martha felt a sharp pang in her chest. David had always been the pragmatic one, the son who prioritized stability and practicality over anything else. She loved him deeply, but in moments like these, his words cut deep. "I'm not chasing anything that's unrealistic, David," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I'm doing something I've always wanted to do." David sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Mom, you've had your time. You've done enough. Raising us, working all those years, sacrificing so much. You should be relaxing now, not getting worked up over some talent show." Emma, who had been listening quietly in the corner, couldn't hold back any longer. "Grandma is amazing, Dad. You should hear her sing. She's going to win. I know it." David softened slightly, ruffling Emma's hair. "You're a good kid, Emma. But sometimes winning isn't everything. Sometimes it's better to know when to let go." As David turned to leave, the weight of his words hung in the air. Martha stood silently for a moment, her heart heavy with doubt. But before she could let his take root, Emma rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her. "Don't listen to him, Grandma. You can do this. I believe in you." Martha hugged her granddaughter tightly, drawing strength from her words. Emma's unwavering faith was like a lifeline, pulling her out of the sea of doubt that threatened to overwhelm her. The following weeks were filled with rehearsals and more auditions. Each trip to the city was exhausting. The metro rides were long, and the busy streets of Chicago felt overwhelming at times. But every time Martha thought about giving up, she would remember Emma's wide-eyed belief in her, and that gave her the courage to keep going. The competition was progressing, and to Martha's surprise, she was advancing. With each round, more people began to notice her. There was something different about her voice, something that set her apart from the other contestants. Her voice, though aged and weathered, carried a depth of emotion that younger singers couldn't replicate. Martha wasn't just singing notes. She was telling a story with every performance, a story filled with decades of love, loss, and resilience. But as the competition advanced, so did the financial strain. Selling the TV had covered the initial costs, but there were more expenses now. New outfits for the performances, additional trips into the city for rehearsals, and the rising cost of metro fares. Martha stretched every dollar as far as it would go, but she knew she was running out of options. One night, as she sat at her small kitchen table, going over her meager budget, a sinking feeling settled in her chest. She had sold everything of value, and borrowing money from her children felt like admitting defeat. Pride, a stubborn trait she had carried all her life, wouldn't allow her to ask for their help, especially knowing how unsupportive they had been. As the grand finale approached, a final blow threatened to unravel everything she had worked for. Martha received a notice from the metro company that her usual route would be delayed for maintenance on the day of the performance. Panic set in. Without the metro, how would she make it to the final audition? She didn't have the money for a cab, and relying on buses felt too risky. If she missed the performance, all her efforts would have been for nothing. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to herself, her heart heavy with fear. Emma, ever the problem solver, overheard her grandmother's distress and immediately began brainstorming solutions. "We could take a cab," she suggested, her voice full of excitement. Martha shook her head sadly. "A cab would cost too much, sweetheart." "Well, what about a bus?" Emma persisted, her determination not fading. But Martha knew the buses weren't reliable enough to risk it. Every option seemed blocked, and with each passing day the weight of the situation pressed down on her more and more. She didn't want to disappoint Emma, and more than anything, she didn't want to disappoint herself. After coming so far, could this really be the end of her dream? Martha's journey is far from over. Will she find a way to make it to the final performance? Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this inspiring story. The days leading up to the final performance felt like a whirlwind. Martha's rehearsals were more intense than ever, and her nerves were beginning to wear her down. The looming issue of transportation hung over her like a dark cloud. No matter how much she tried to focus on her singing, the fear of not making it to the performance weighed heavily on her heart. Emma, however, refused to give up hope. Every day after school, she would come home with new ideas and suggestions. "Grandma, maybe we could ask Mr. Jenkins next door if he could give us a ride," Emma suggested one afternoon, her face lit with determination. Martha appreciated her granddaughter's relentless optimism, but she couldn't bear the thought of asking for more favors. "Mr. Jenkins is a kind man, but I don't want to impose on him, sweetheart," Martha replied, gently brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Emma's face fell slightly, but she wasn't discouraged for long. "What about a car service? Jenny's mom uses one sometimes, and it's cheaper than a cab." Martha smiled at her granddaughter's enthusiasm, but sighed deeply. "I'm not sure we can afford even that. I've been stretching every dollar just to make it this far." Emma paused, her face softening with realization. She looked down at the floor for a moment, then suddenly perked up with a bright idea. "What if we ask Aunt Sarah for help?" Martha's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her daughter. Sarah had always been distant, focused on her career and life far away from Chicago. They hadn't spoken in months, not since a brief phone call where Martha had tried to explain the competition to her, only to be met with polite indifference. She doubted Sarah would be interested in helping now, especially after so much time had passed. "I don't want to bother your Aunt Sarah, sweetheart," Martha said softly. "She's got her own life to worry about." But Emma wasn't so easily deterred. "You never know, Grandma. Maybe she'll want to help if she knows how important this is to you." Martha smiled at Emma's optimism, but kept her doubts to herself. Asking Sarah for help felt like admitting weakness, and Martha had never been one to show vulnerability, especially not to her children. Still, the thought lingered in her mind as the days passed, and the stress of finding a solution grew heavier. Then, on the morning of the final audition, just as Martha was preparing herself to face the day, something unexpected happened. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she had worn to each performance, Emma burst into the room with an envelope clutched tightly in her hands. "Grandma, look, it's from Aunt Sarah." Emma's voice was full of excitement as she held out the letter. Martha blinked in surprise. "From Sarah," she repeated, her heart racing as she took the envelope from Emma's hand. She hadn't heard from her daughter in so long. What could this be about? With trembling hands, Martha carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter, written in Sarah's neat handwriting. "Dear Mom, I've been thinking a lot about you lately, and Emma told me about the singing competition. I'm so proud of you for chasing your dream, even after all this time. I know we haven't spoken much, and I regret that, so I'm sending this to help you get to your final performance. You deserve this chance. Love, Sarah." Martha's eyes filled with tears as she unfolded the check that had been tucked inside the letter. It was more than enough to cover the cost of transportation, with enough left over to ease some of her financial worries. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for weeks suddenly lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief. Emma's face lit up with joy as she saw the tears in her grandmother's eyes. "I knew something good would happen, Grandma. Now you can make it to the performance." Martha knelt down and pulled Emma into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been my biggest supporter through all of this. I don't know what I would do without you." With renewed determination, Martha quickly arranged for a car service to take her to the theater. As she and Emma waited for the car to arrive, the air between them was filled with excitement and nervous energy. The final performance was just hours away, and for the first time in weeks, Martha felt a sense of peace wash over her. When the car finally pulled up outside their house, Martha and Emma climbed in, their hands clasped tightly together. As they drove through the busy streets of Chicago, the city skyline looming in the distance, Martha's heart raced with anticipation. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for months, the culmination of years of dreaming and weeks of hard work. As the car came to a stop in front of the theater, Martha stepped out, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and fear wash over her. The grand marquee above the entrance gleamed in the afternoon light, and the bustling crowd of contestants and their families filled the air with a buzz of anticipation. Martha took a deep breath, steadying herself as she walked inside. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Contestants were rushing around, checking their costumes, warming up their voices, and sharing nervous glances. Martha stood quietly in the corner, taking it all in. She could feel the eyes of the younger contestants on her, curious, perhaps even skeptical. But she wasn't here for them. She was here for herself, for Emma, for the dream she had carried with her for so many years. As the minutes ticked by, Martha's nerves began to build. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the sheet music in her lap. She had come so far, but now, in the final moments before the performance, doubt began to creep in. What if she forgot the words? What if her voice faltered? What if all of this had been for nothing? Just as the fear threatened to overwhelm her, Emma appeared by her side, her small hand slipping into Martha's. "You're going to be amazing, Grandma. I know it." Martha looked down at her granddaughter, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Thank you, Emma. I'll do my best." Finally, her name was called. Martha stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding as the bright lights blinded her for a moment. The theater seemed even larger than it had before, the rows of seats stretching into the darkness, filled with an audience waiting in anticipation. The familiar rush of nerves surged through her, but this time, there was something different. Standing in the wings, she could see Emma's small face glowing with excitement and pride. That was all Martha needed to steady herself. She took a deep breath and let the familiar warmth of the stage settle her. She had been rehearsing for this moment for weeks, but in reality, she had been waiting for it her entire life. Every note, every lyric she was about to sing carried the weight of decades, of a dream long buried, but never forgotten. It was more than just a performance. It was a moment of truth. As the music began to play, Martha closed her eyes for a second, letting the melody wrap around her. Then she opened her mouth and the first note slipped out, soft but strong. Her voice, though weathered by time, carried a depth and emotion that filled the theater. It wasn't the polished sound of a young singer. It was raw, real, and full of life. Each word was laced with the story of who she was, of everything she had lived through, and the dream that had carried her here. The audience sat in silence, their attention fixed on the woman standing on the stage. For many of them, Martha was an unexpected sight, an older woman in a sea of young, polished talent. But as her voice swelled, carrying the notes high into the theater's rafters, it became clear that there was something special happening. Her song wasn't just a performance. It was a confession, a declaration of a life lived with both heartbreak and hope. Emma sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, watching her grandmother with wide eyes. To her, Martha was the most incredible singer in the world. And now, seeing her up there under the bright lights, she felt a surge of pride that made her heart swell. This wasn't just any performance. It was a victory. I've walked this road 1,000 miles, with weary eyes and quiet smiles. The world, it told me to let go, but deep inside the fire still glows. Years may pass, the days may fade, but dreams, they never drift away. I kept them safe in my heart's embrace, and now I'm standing face to face. It's never too late to reach for the stars. No matter how distant, no matter how far, I'll sing my song, I'll find my place. With every note I'll rise, I'll face the fear, the doubt, the weight of time. But here I am. This dream is mine. The world has changed, but I remain. Through every joy, through every pain, I held my breath, I held my ground, and now I find my voice, my sound. Years may pass, the days may fade, but dreams, they never drift away. I kept them safe in my heart's embrace, and now I'm standing face to face. It's never too late to reach for the stars. No matter how distant, no matter how far, I'll sing my song, I'll find my place. With every note I'll rise, I'll face the fear, the doubt, the weight of time. But here I am, this dream is mine. Every tear I've shed, every step I've made has led me here to this stage. I won't look back, I won't look down. Tonight's the night I wear my crown. It's never too late to reach for the stars. No matter how distant, no matter how far, I'll sing my song. I'll find my place. With every note I'll rise, I'll face the fear, the doubt, the weight of time. But here I stand, this dream is mine. Then, with the final note, the music faded, leaving a lingering silence in its wake. Martha stood there, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath, waiting for the response. For a moment, the silence stretched on, and a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Had she done enough? But then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few claps, hesitant at first, and then it grew, swelling into a thunderous ovation that filled the theater. Martha blinked back the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes as she looked out at the audience. They were standing. Everyone in the theater was on their feet, clapping, cheering, and shouting their approval. In the front row, Emma was jumping up and down, her face beaming with joy. Martha smiled through her tears, her heart full. She had done it. She had given everything she had, and it was enough. Backstage, after the performance, Martha was met with a flurry of congratulations. Contestants and staff members alike approached her, praising her performance, telling her how moved they had been by her voice. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. For the first time in a long time, Martha felt truly seen, not as an aging woman with a past, but as a singer with a story to tell. Still, there was one more hurdle to cross: the announcement of the winner. The final moments of the competition felt like a blur. Martha stood among the other contestants, her heart racing, as they waited for the host to read the results. The tension in the room was thick, each performer anxiously awaiting their fate. Martha glanced down at Emma, who was standing beside her, clutching her hand tightly. "No matter what happens, Grandma, you were the best," Emma whispered, her voice filled with confidence. Martha squeezed her granddaughter's hand, feeling a wave of love wash over her. "Thank you, darling. I couldn't have done any of this without you." The host stepped forward, holding the envelope that contained the final results. His voice boomed through the theater as he thanked the contestants, the audience, and the judges for an incredible night. Martha's heart pounded in her chest as the moment of truth approached. "And the winner of this year's citywide talent competition is..." The host paused for dramatic effect, drawing out the anticipation. Martha held her breath, her hands trembling as she waited. Martha Fitzgerald, the words rang out across the theater, and for a split second, Martha didn't believe what she had heard. It wasn't until Emma let out a joyous scream and threw her arms around her that the reality began to sink in. She had won. After all the struggles, the doubts, the sacrifices, she had won. Tears streamed down Martha's face as she stepped forward to accept the trophy. The applause was deafening, but all she could think about was the journey that had brought her here. It wasn't just about the prize money or the recognition. It was about proving to herself that it was never too late to chase a dream, no matter how impossible it seemed. As she held the trophy in her hands, Martha looked out into the audience for her eyes scanning the crowd. To her surprise, she spotted David, her eldest son, standing in the back. His expression was one of pride, something she hadn't seen in him in years. He hadn't told her he was coming, but there he was, watching her with a look that made her heart swell with emotion. After the show, David approached her backstage, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "Mom, I'm sorry I doubted you. I didn't realize how much this meant to you." Martha smiled through her tears, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, David. That means more to me than you know." They hugged, a long, overdue embrace that began to heal the rift that had grown between them over the years. Later that night, as Martha and Emma rode home in the car, the trophy resting on Martha's lap, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had not only realized her dream, but she had also reconnected with her family in a way she hadn't thought possible. But the greatest reward of all wasn't the trophy or the money. It was the realization that it was never too late to follow your heart. As they arrived back home, Emma tugged on her grandmother's sleeve, her voice filled with excitement. "So, Grandma, what's the next big dream?" Martha laughed, a sound full of joy and freedom. "I don't know, darling, but whatever it is, I know we'll chase it together." "Great! I'm going to develop the conclusion of this story here, closing all the loose ends and bringing an emotionally satisfying resolution with more than 5,000 characters. Here is the conclusion. In the days following Martha's victory, her life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after the competition, she woke up to find that her small neighborhood had become abuzz with excitement. Word had spread quickly about her win, and neighbors she had barely spoken to in years now stopped her on the street, offering their congratulations and telling her how inspired they were by her story. Martha was no longer just the elderly widow who lived quietly in her modest house. She was a local hero, a symbol of resilience and the power of second chances. For Martha, the money from the competition was a relief, but it wasn't what mattered most. She used part of it to settle her mounting bills and make necessary repairs to her home. But she kept a large portion aside for something special, a surprise she had been quietly planning for Emma. With the leftover funds, she signed Emma up for piano lessons, something her granddaughter had dreamed of for years, but never had the opportunity to pursue. It was a small way of repaying Emma for all the love and support she had given throughout the competition. When Martha revealed the surprise, Emma's reaction was priceless. Her eyes lit up with disbelief, and then she threw her arms around her grandmother, thanking her again and again. "You didn't have to do this for me, Grandma," Emma said, her voice full of emotion. Martha smiled, holding her granddaughter close. "You believed in me when no one else did, Emma. This is just my way of saying thank you." From that day on, their house was filled with music. Emma's piano playing echoed through the rooms in the mornings, while Martha's voice carried through the evenings. Together, they created their own little world of sound and dreams, a place where both of them could continue to chase their passions. But the most profound changes came from Martha's family. The competition had acted as a catalyst, bringing them closer together in ways she hadn't expected. David, her eldest son, had visited her more in the weeks following her win than he had in the entire year prior. His initial skepticism had given way to pride, and although he was still the practical, grounded man she had always known, there was now an underlying warmth in their conversations. He had even brought his children by one weekend to hear their grandmother sing, something Martha never thought would happen. One evening, as David sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee while Emma practiced her piano, he glanced at Martha and smiled. "You really showed us all, Mom," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I didn't think it was possible, but you proved me wrong. I'm proud of you." Martha felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Hearing those words from David, the son who had always been the most distant, meant more than any trophy or applause ever could. "Thank you, David," she said softly. "It's never too late to chase a dream." Their relationship, once strained by years of misunderstanding, had begun to heal. The barriers that had kept them apart, David's practicality and Martha's hidden passions, were slowly crumbling. They spoke more openly now, not just about the competition, but about life, regrets, and the things that truly mattered. Martha had long feared that she had lost her connection with her children, but now she saw that it wasn't too late to rebuild those bridges. Her daughter, Sarah, had also changed. After sending the money to help Martha make it to the final performance, Sarah had called more often, apologizing for the distance between them. She had been so focused on her career and her own life that she had lost sight of what really mattered. Martha hadn't expected the phone call that came one Sunday afternoon, but when Sarah's number flashed on the screen, Martha answered with hope in her heart. "Hi, Mom." Sarah's voice was tentative, as though she wasn't sure what to say. "Sarah, it's so good to hear from you," Martha replied, her heart lifting at the sound of her daughter's voice. "I saw the video of your final performance," Sarah said. "You were incredible." I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have been." Martha smiled, though tears pricked at her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. I know you've been busy, and I'm just glad you were thinking of me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Sarah continued. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Mom, about how much I've missed over the years. I don't want that distance between us anymore. Can we start over?" Martha's breath caught in her throat. She had longed for this moment for so long, a chance to reconnect with the daughter who had drifted away. "Of course, Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd love that." In the weeks that followed, their relationship began to mend. Sarah called regularly, and for the first time in years, Martha felt like a true part of her daughter's life again. It wasn't just about the competition or the singing. It was about the love that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. But perhaps the most touching moment of all came from an unexpected place. One afternoon, while Martha was sitting in her garden, enjoying the warm autumn sun, she received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, and as she opened it, she discovered it was from one of the judges at the competition. "Dear Mrs. Fitzgerald," the letter began, "I've been a judge at countless talent competitions over the years, but your performance touched me in a way I've never experienced before. It wasn't just your voice, it was the heart behind it. Your story, your resilience, and your passion reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You have a gift, not just in your voice, but in your spirit. I hope you continue to share it with the world." Martha sat there for a long moment, holding the letter in her hands, a smile spreading across her face. It wasn't about fame or fortune. Those things had never mattered to her. What mattered was that she had finally shared her dream with the world, and in doing so, had touched people's hearts. The next few months were filled with joy. Martha and Emma continued their musical journey together, their bond growing stronger with each note. Sarah visited more often, and even David began to relax and let go of his doubts. The rift that had once separated Martha from her family had begun to close, and in its place was a deep sense of love and connection. One evening, as Martha sat at the piano with Emma, their voices blending together in a sweet harmony, she paused for a moment, looking down at her granddaughter. "You know, Emma," Martha said softly, "I never thought I'd get this far, but you believed in me when no one else did. I'm so proud of you." Emma beamed up at her, her fingers still resting on the piano keys. "I always knew you could do it, Grandma, and now look, you did it." Martha smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart that she hadn't felt in years. She had done it. She had chased her dream, and in doing so, had not only found herself, but had also reconnected with the people who mattered most. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow over the room, Martha felt at peace. Her life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but now she knew that it was never too late to follow your heart. And with Emma by her side, she knew that whatever the future held, They would face it together, their voices intertwined in a harmony that would carry them forward. If you loved Martha's inspiring journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more heartwarming stories. Stay tuned for what's coming next.